On a cold February morning in 1997 in the quiet town of Ravalli, Montana, a 5-year-old boy named Silas Devin went outside to play in the snow and never came back. His mother, Devin, 28 years old and 8 months pregnant, said she watched him from the kitchen window. She said she turned away for just a moment. She said when she looked back, he was gone. The neighbors searched. The sheriff's deputies searched. Dogs tracked his scent to the edge of the property and then lost it completely, as if the boy had simply vanished into the February wind. For 26 years, Devin maintained her story. She never wavered. She never broke. And for 26 years, those who knew her best wondered if she was telling the truth. Because sometimes, the person crying the loudest is the one who knows exactly where to look. The town of Ravalli sits in the Jocko Valley of western Montana, population barely scraping 300 souls, the kind of place where everybody knows your name and your business before you've finished introducing yourself. In February 1997, the valley was locked in the iron grip of a particularly brutal winter. Snow lay 4 feet deep in places. The temperature hadn't climbed above 20 degrees in 3 weeks. The mountains rose up on all sides like frozen sentinels, their peaks lost in low gray clouds that seemed to press down on the valley floor with physical weight. The Devin family lived in a small rental house on the eastern edge of town, a weathered 2-bedroom structure with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. Raymond Devin, 32, worked irregular hours at a lumber mill 20 miles north in St. Ignatius. Christine stayed home with Silas and prepared for the arrival of their second child. Those who knew the family said they kept to themselves mostly. Raymond was quiet, polite when you saw him at the grocery store, but not the type to linger for conversation. Christine was younger, slender even in her pregnancy. With long, dark hair she wore pulled back and eyes that seemed always on the verge of tears even before that terrible morning. Silas was a bright child, curious and energetic despite the confining winter. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's delicate features. His kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Patricia Hallbrook, would later tell investigators that Silas was reading above grade level, that he loved dinosaurs and dump trucks, that he asked questions constantly about how things worked. He was, she said, the kind of child you noticed, the kind you remembered. February 14, 1997, Valentine's Day. The morning dawned gray and bitter, the thermometer on the Devins' porch reading 17 degrees at 7 a.m. Raymond had left for work before sunrise, his truck's taillights disappearing down the long gravel drive in the pre-dawn darkness. Christine made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and Silas ate at the small kitchen table while she stood at the counter, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, the other holding a cup of weak tea. The house was quiet except for the hiss of the propane heater and the scrape of Silas's fork on his plate. Around 9:30 that morning, Christine would later tell police Silas asked if he could go outside to play. She said yes. She helped him into his snow pants, his heavy winter coat, his boots. She wrapped a scarf around his neck. She pulled a knit cap down over his ears. She told him to stay in the front yard where she could see him from the window. She told him she would watch. The details of the next hour would be scrutinized and dissected and questioned for more than 2 decades. Christine said Silas went outside at approximately 9:45 a.m. She said he took his red plastic sled and pulled it toward the small slope at the side of the house. She said she stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes and looking out the window every few moments. She said she saw him sliding down the slope. She said she turned to wipe down the counter. She said when she looked back, perhaps 3 minutes later, he was gone. She said she called his name from the doorway. She said she walked outside in her house slippers, calling louder. She said she checked the garage, the backyard, the path to the road. She said she went back inside and called Raymond at work. She said she then called 911. The call came in at 10:14. The dispatch recording would be played in courtroom 26 years later, Christine's voice high and breathless. "My son is missing. He was just outside. He was right outside. I can't find him." Ravalli County Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Holloway arrived at 10:28. He was 41 years old, a Montana native who had worked law enforcement for 16 years. He found Christine standing in the front yard, coatless despite the cold, her arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking. She pointed toward the sled, which lay on its side halfway down the small slope. "He was right there," she said. "He was right there, and then he wasn't." Deputy Holloway walked the property. He noted in his report that the snow was disturbed in several places, but the ground was too hard and the snow too old and crusty to show clear footprints. He noted that the road in front of the house showed tire tracks, but again, nothing distinct. He noted that Christine's house slippers were soaked through. He noted that she kept touching her stomach with both hands, a protective gesture, repetitive. By 11 a.m., 6 more deputies had arrived. By noon, 30 volunteers from the community had gathered at the house. The search began in earnest. Men and women spread out across the property and into the surrounding fields and tree lines. They called Silas's name. The sound echoed off the mountains and came back hollow. Search and rescue dogs arrived from Missoula at 1:15 p.m. The dogs picked up Silas's scent immediately in the front yard. They followed it to the edge of the property, to a spot near the gravel road approximately 70 feet from the house. And there, the scent stopped. Not faded, stopped, as if the child had been picked up and carried away. Raymond Devin arrived home at 1:40 p.m., his face gray with shock. He spoke briefly with deputies and then joined the search, calling his son's name until his voice cracked. Neighbors who were there said he seemed genuinely distraught. They said Christine stayed mostly in the house, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the window. The temperature dropped as afternoon turned to evening. The search continued under portable lights. Law enforcement expanded the search radius to 2 miles. They checked abandoned buildings, irrigation ditches, livestock shelters. They checked the Jocko River, which ran a quarter-mile to the south, though the water was frozen solid in most places. They found nothing. No tracks, no clothing, no sign of the child. Clears throat. By midnight, the official search was suspended until morning. The volunteers went home, their faces drawn with exhaustion and cold. Deputy Holloway stayed, sitting in his patrol car with the engine running for heat, watching the house. He noted in his report that the kitchen lights stayed on all night. He noted that he never saw Christine come to the window. The next morning, February 15th, the search resumed with reinforcements from surrounding counties. The media arrived, camera crews from Missoula and Kalispell. Christine did a brief interview on the front porch, her voice breaking as she pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. "Please," she said into the camera, "if you know anything, if you saw anything, please help us find our boy." Raymond stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his jaw clenched tight. Federal investigators from the FBI arrived on February 16th. The case had all the hallmarks of an abduction, a child vanishing in broad daylight, no witnesses, no evidence. The scent trail ending at the road suggested a vehicle. The FBI established a command post in the Ravalli Community Center and began interviewing everyone in town, everyone who had driven past the Devin house that morning, everyone who knew the family. Those who knew Raymond said he was a good father, attentive and patient with Silas. They said he worked hard, kept his head down, never caused trouble. Those who knew Christine were less certain in their descriptions. Some said she was a devoted mother. Others said she seemed overwhelmed, that she often looked tired, that they had seen her crying in the grocery store parking lot more than once. One neighbor, Ellen Pritchard, told investigators that Christine had once confided in her that motherhood was harder than she'd expected, that she sometimes felt trapped. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the inconsistencies. Christine said she had looked away for 3 minutes, but the distance from the kitchen window to where the sled was found was perhaps 40 feet. Even with old snow, even with a struggling child, it would take time to carry a 5-year-old 70 feet to the road, load him into a vehicle, and drive away. Could all of that happen in 3 minutes? Could it happen in 5? In 10? They noted that Christine had called Raymond before calling 911. Why? The delay was roughly 8 minutes. What was said in that phone call? They noted that Christine's story never changed. She repeated the same sequence of events in every interview, using almost the exact same words. In law enforcement, that kind of consistency can mean one of two things. Either someone is telling the truth, or they have rehearsed their lie so many times they believe it themselves. Physical evidence was scarce. Tire impressions on the road were analyzed but proved inconclusive. The red sled yielded no fingerprints other than what was consistent with a child's hands. The house was searched thoroughly. Investigators found nothing unusual. The baby's room was partially set up, a crib assembled, clothes folded in drawers. Everything appeared normal. On February 22nd, 8 days after Silas disappeared, Christine went into labor. She delivered a healthy baby girl, Emma, at St. Luke Community Healthcare in Ronan. Raymond was with her. The FBI interviewed Christine briefly in the hospital. She held her newborn daughter and wept. "I just want Silas back," she said. "I just want my boy." The investigation continued through March. Tips came in, dozens of them. Reported sightings of a child matching Silas's description in Idaho, in Washington State, in North Dakota. Each one was investigated. Each one led nowhere. The FBI brought in additional resources. They conducted polygraph examinations. Raymond passed. Christine's results were, according to the report, inconclusive. When pressed on what that meant, the examiner noted elevated stress responses to questions about the timeline of the morning Silas disappeared. By April, the media attention had waned. The search operation ceased. The case remained open, but active leads had dried up. The FBI maintained a presence, but the day-to-day investigation slowed. Deputy Holloway continued to drive past the Devin house regularly. He noted in his personal log that he often saw Raymond's truck gone during work hours, as expected. He noted that he sometimes saw Christine standing in the front yard, staring toward the spot where the sled had been found, even months later. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, you understand the particular kind of torment. You look at their face and wonder what they are thinking. You listen to their words and wonder what they are not saying. You watch them sleep and wonder if they dream of truth or lies. Clear's throat. The years passed slowly in Ravalli. The seasons turned. The snow that had covered the ground the day Silas disappeared melted in spring, and the earth yielded no secrets. Summer came, hot and dry. Autumn followed with its golden aspens and early frosts. And then winter returned and the valley was white again, and the Devin house stood quiet under the weight of all that snow and all that silence. In September 1998, 18 months after Silas vanished, the Devin family moved away from Ravalli. They relocated to Great Falls, Montana, a city of 60,000 people 200 miles to the east, where nobody knew their story, where they could walk through a grocery store without whispers following them down every aisle. Raymond found work at a manufacturing plant. Christine stayed home with Emma, who was walking now, talking in short sentences, oblivious to the ghost of the brother she had never known. Neighbors in Great Falls who knew the Devins would later describe them as quiet, isolated. The family kept to themselves. Raymond worked long hours. Christine rarely left the house. They attended no church. They joined no community groups. They existed in a kind of self-imposed exile, and those few who got close enough to observe said the marriage seemed strained. Raymond and Christine rarely spoke to each other in public. When they did, their words were clipped, functional. They did not touch. Emma, as she grew, was a solemn child. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features. Preschool teachers noted that she was withdrawn, that she rarely smiled, that she played alone. In kindergarten, Emma drew pictures that troubled her teacher enough to contact a school counselor. The pictures showed stick figures, a woman and a child, and always off to the side, separated by heavy black scribbles, another small figure. When asked about the drawings, Emma said, "That's Silas. He's cold." Christine told the counselor that Emma had heard stories about her older brother, that children sometimes fixated on things they didn't understand. The counselor noted the explanation, but also noted that Christine's hands shook as she spoke, that she left the meeting abruptly, that she did not make eye contact. In the years following the move, the cold case file in Ravalli remained open but dormant. Deputy Holloway, who had been the first responder on that February morning, retired from the sheriff's department in 2004. Before he left, he made copies of his notes and kept them in a file box in his garage. He told a colleague, "Something about that case never sat right. The mother's story, the timing, something." In 2009, 12 years after Silas disappeared, Christine and Raymond Devin separated. Raymond moved into an apartment across town. Emma, now 12 years old, stayed with her mother. The divorce proceedings were quiet and swift. Neither party contested custody or division of assets. They simply separated as if both were exhausted by the weight of sharing a life neither could bear. Those who have ever lived with unspoken truth understand how it calcifies inside you. It becomes part of your bone structure, part of your breathing. You carry it everywhere. It shapes how you hold yourself, how you speak, how you sleep. And it shapes the people around you too, bending them slowly like trees grown in constant wind, until everyone is leaning in the same direction, away from the thing that cannot be said. Emma lived alone with her mother in the small house in Great Falls. She was a teenager now, quiet and watchful. She did well in school, made decent grades, but had few friends. Teachers described her as bright but detached, as if she were observing the world from behind glass. At home, neighbors said they heard shouting sometimes late at night. They heard Christine's voice raised, pleading or angry, though they could never make out the words. They saw Emma leaving for school in the mornings with dark circles under her eyes. In the winter of 2015, Emma was 18 years old and preparing to graduate high school. She had been accepted to Montana State University in Bozeman. She was planning to leave home, to start fresh somewhere her last name meant nothing. And it was then, in the quiet of her final months in that house, that Emma began having nightmares. She would wake screaming, tangled in her sheets, her mother standing in the doorway with a stricken expression. Emma told a friend, one of the few she had, that the nightmares were always the same. She was small again, very small, and there was snow, and someone was crying, and there was a boy she couldn't quite see calling her name, even though she knew somehow that she had never met him. In March 2015, Emma went to her father's apartment. She sat at his kitchen table and asked him a question she had carried inside herself for years. What really happened to Silas? Raymond looked at his daughter for a long moment. He was 50 years old now, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined with 18 years of silence. He said, "I don't know, Emma. I wish I did." Emma said, "I don't believe that." Raymond stood and walked to the window. He was quiet for so long Emma thought he wouldn't respond. Then he said, "Your mother, she was different back then. She was struggling, the pregnancy, the isolation, the cold." He stopped. He turned to look at his daughter. "I wanted to believe her story. I needed to believe it." Emma said, "But you didn't." Raymond said nothing. Clears throat. In June 2015, Emma graduated high school. 1 week later, she walked into the Great Falls Police Department and asked to speak to someone about a missing person case. She was 18 now, an adult, no longer bound by the complicated loyalty of childhood. She sat across from Detective Sarah Brennan and said, "I think my mother knows what happened to my brother." Detective Brennan was 43 years old, a 17-year veteran of the department. She had not been involved in the original investigation, but like every law enforcement officer in Montana, she knew the story of Silas Devin. She listened as Emma spoke haltingly, telling her about the nightmares, about her mother's strange moods, about the way Christine would sometimes stand in the kitchen staring at nothing and whispering apologies to someone who wasn't there. Emma said, "When I was little, maybe 8 or 9, I asked her about Silas. She started crying. She said, 'He's not cold anymore, he's sleeping.' I didn't understand what that meant." Detective Brennan made notes. She asked Emma if her mother had ever explicitly confessed. Emma said no, but the implication had always been there, hanging in the air like smoke. "She knows," Emma said. "I'm certain she knows." Detective Brennan contacted the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office. She spoke with Sheriff Tom Valdez, who had been a deputy during the original investigation. Together, they decided to reopen the case. On August 3, 2015, investigators returned to the old Devin property in Ravalli, now occupied by a different family. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they began a methodical search of the land. For 2 days, they found nothing. On August 5th, in the late afternoon, a cadaver dog alerted to a spot in the trees behind the house, approximately 150 feet from where the Devins had lived. The area was overgrown with brush. Investigators began excavating carefully. 3 feet down, they found bones, small bones, a child's bones. The remains were transported to the Montana State Crime Lab. Forensic analysis confirmed they were human, a child approximately 4 to 6 years old. DNA testing was expedited. On September 12, 2015, the results came back. The bones were Silas Devin's. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with either a fall or a blow from a heavy object. The remains showed signs of having been buried hurriedly, the grave shallow and poorly concealed. Time of death was consistent with February 1997. On September 15, 2015, Detective Brennan and Sheriff Valdez drove to Great Falls. They arrived at Christine Devin's house at 6:20 a.m. Christine answered the door in her bathrobe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was 53 years old now, thinner than she had been in the photos from 1997, her face drawn and deeply lined. "Christine Devin," Detective Brennan said, "you are under arrest for the murder of your son, Silas Raymond Devin." Christine did not resist. She did not cry out. She stood very still as they handcuffed her, her eyes distant, as if she were looking at something far away. As they led her to the patrol car, Emma stood in the doorway of the house, her arms crossed over her chest, her face unreadable. The arrest made national news. The case that had gone cold for 18 years was suddenly everywhere. Cable news, podcasts, true crime forums. The community of Ravalli erupted with shock and anger. Those who had known the Devins in 1997 came forward with their memories, their suspicion, their guilt at not speaking up sooner. Ellen Pritchard, the neighbor Christine had once confided in, told reporters, "I always wondered. When she said motherhood was hard, there was something in her eyes. But I didn't want to believe. Who wants to believe something like that?" Raymond Devin issued a brief statement through his attorney. "I am devastated by the truth. I grieve for my son and for the years we lost believing a lie." The trial began in April 2016 in Missoula, Montana. The prosecution's case was built on forensic evidence, the location of the remains, and Emma's testimony about her mother's behavior over the years. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the remains' location did not prove Christine had placed them there, that a child's nightmares and a mother's grief should not be twisted into proof of guilt. On the witness stand, Emma Devin, now 19 years old, testified about the whispered apologies, the strange comments, the oppressive silence that had defined her childhood. She spoke calmly, her voice steady, but those in the courtroom said she gripped the edge of the witness box so hard her knuckles turned white. The prosecution called a forensic psychologist who testified about maternal filicide, about how stress, isolation, and untreated mental illness can create a perfect storm. They called Deputy Holloway, now retired, who testified about the inconsistencies in Christine's original statement, about his lingering doubts. The defense called witnesses who testified that Christine had been a loving mother to Emma, that grief manifests in complex ways, that speaking cryptic phrases in moments of pain does not equal murder. On June 7, 2016, Christine Devin took the stand in her own defense. She looked older than her 54 years, her hair now streaked with gray, her hands trembling visibly. Her attorney asked her to tell the jury what happened on February 14, 1997. Christine spoke quietly. She said Silas had gone outside to play. She said she had been standing at the kitchen sink. She said she heard a thud, loud and sickening. She said she ran outside and found Silas at the bottom of the slope, his sled overturned, his head bleeding. She said she knew immediately he was gone. "Why didn't you call 911 right away?" her attorney asked. Christine's voice broke. "I panicked. I thought they would blame me. I thought they would say I wasn't watching. I thought they would take Emma away when she was born." "What did you do?" "I buried him," Christine whispered. "In the trees. I buried him and then I made up the story about him disappearing. I called Raymond. I called 911. I lied because I was terrified." "Did you harm your son intentionally?" "No," Christine said, tears streaming down her face. "Never. It was an accident, a terrible, terrible accident." The prosecution's cross-examination was methodical and brutal. They pointed out that Christine had lied for 18 years. They pointed out that she had let hundreds of people search for a child she knew was dead. They pointed out that the medical examiner's report indicated the trauma to Silas's skull was more consistent with a blow than a fall. They asked why, if it was truly an accident, she had not called for help. They asked why she had hidden the truth even after she and Raymond separated, even after Emma had grown up, even when there was nothing left to protect. Christine had no answers that satisfied anyone. On June 23, 2016, after 14 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of involuntary manslaughter and abuse of a corpse. The judge sentenced Christine to 25 years in the Montana Women's Prison in Billings. She was taken into custody immediately. As they led her from the courtroom, she turned to look at Emma, who sat in the gallery with her father. Christine opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Emma looked away. Clears throat. The case of Silas Devin raised more questions than it answered. Was his death truly an accident, a moment of panic that spiraled into decades of deception? Or was there something darker, a truth Christine carried to prison, a story she would never tell? Those who followed the trial were divided. Some believed her confession. Others believed she had finally admitted to a fraction of her guilt, revealing just enough to avoid a murder conviction while still concealing the full horror of what happened that February morning. Silas Raymond Devin was laid to rest in a cemetery in Ravalli on July 9, 2016. He was 5 years old when he died. He would have been 24. The headstone is simple granite with his name, his dates, and a single line: "You were not forgotten." Raymond and Emma Devin attended the funeral. 73 members of the community came, people who had searched for Silas in 1997, people who had carried his memory for 19 years. They stood in the summer heat and listened as a pastor spoke about innocence lost and truth finally told. Emma placed a toy dump truck on the grave, weathered and faded, something she had found in a box in her mother's closet. "It was his," she said quietly. "He should have it." In the years since the trial, Emma has graduated from college. She works as a social worker in Billings, helping families in crisis. She does not visit her mother in prison. She told a journalist in 2019, "Some people ask if I forgive her. I don't know how to answer that. She gave me life. She also taught me what it means to live with a lie. Maybe both of those things can be true." Raymond Devin still lives in Great Falls. He is remarried. He does not speak publicly about Silas or the trial. Those who know him say he is a quiet man, kind but distant, as if some essential part of him was buried in those trees behind the house in Ravalli and never fully recovered. Christine Devin remains incarcerated. She will be eligible for parole in 2034 when she is 72 years old. According to prison records, she has had few visitors. She spends her time in the library and attends a weekly grief counseling group. A prison chaplain who spoke anonymously said, "She talks about Silas sometimes. She says she sees him in her dreams, playing in the snow. She says he forgives her. I don't know if that's true or if it's what she needs to believe to survive." The house in Ravalli where the Devins lived in 1997 still stands. The family who lives there now says they sometimes hear children playing in the yard, though their own children are grown and gone. They say on winter mornings when the snow is fresh and the air is still, you can almost see the tracks of a small sled going down the slope beside the house, and then nothing. Just unmarked snow stretching away toward the trees, white and silent and endless. For those who have ever wondered what truth costs, the answer is this: everything. It costs years. It costs families. It costs the ability to look at your own reflection without flinching. But silence costs more. Silence costs a child's memory. Silence costs justice. Silence costs the one thing we cannot afford to lose, the thin and fragile belief that in the end the truth will matter. Silas Devin mattered. His 5 years of life mattered. And the 26 years it took to bring his story into the light matter too. Not because they gave us easy answers, not because they made sense of senseless tragedy, but because they proved that even when a voice is silenced, even when a life is hidden away in the cold ground, someone somewhere will keep asking questions. Someone will keep searching. Someone will refuse to let the silence win. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.